There is a specific kind of woman in Greenwich, Connecticut, who wears her cruelty the way she wears her Hermes scarf, draped casually as if it cost nothing, as if it were simply part of the ensemble. My mother-in-law, Patricia Ashford Calloway, was that kind of woman. My name is Brooklyn Danielle Hayes. I'm 29 years old. I am a licensed real estate attorney specializing in land trusts, easements, and property succession at one of the most prestigious firms in Stamford, Connecticut. I graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown University Law. I passed the bar on my first attempt. I have closed transactions exceeding $340 million in aggregate value. I am also a size 22. And to Patricia Ashford Calloway, that single fact, the circumference of my waist, the width of my hips, the soft weight of my arms, was the only fact about me that mattered. 8 months ago, Patricia, who has served as the board president of the Briarcliff Country Club for the past 11 years, secretly blackballed my membership application. She did this despite the fact that my husband, her own son, had proposed my name to the membership committee. She did this despite the fact that I met every financial qualification, every residency requirement, and every background standard the club demanded. She did this because, in her words I would later hear played back to me from a recording made by a sympathetic board member, the club has always maintained certain fitness and presentation standards, and Brooklyn, bless her heart, simply doesn't reflect the Briarcliff image. Fitness and presentation standards. That is what Patricia called it. What she meant was, my daughter-in-law is fat, and fat women do not belong in the same rooms as thin women who pay $87,000 in annual dues. She thought that was the end of it. She thought the blackball would remain anonymous, as it always did, tucked behind the polished mahogany doors of the membership review committee, never to be traced back to her perfectly manicured hands. But here is the thing Patricia did not know. Here is the thing Patricia never bothered to learn. Because Patricia had never once asked me a single genuine question about my family, my background, or my inheritance. The Briarcliff Country Club, all 47 acres of it, including the 18-hole golf course, the Olympic swimming pool, the 3 clay tennis courts, the Colonial Revival Clubhouse, and the parking structure that holds 200 Mercedes and BMWs every Saturday afternoon, sits on land that does not belong to the club. It sits on land that was leased in 1926 under a 99-year ground lease from the Hayes Family Trust. My family, my trust, my land, and that lease? It expires in exactly 90 days. Before I tell you what happened when the board received my attorney's certified letter, and before I describe, in precise detail, the expression on Patricia's face when she realized that the woman she had just rejected was the person who owned the ground beneath her feet, I need you to do something. Subscribe, hit the bell, drop your city and your time zone in the comments. I read every single one, usually at midnight with a glass of bourbon and my golden retriever Cash lying across my feet. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you the architecture of this particular disaster. I grew up in Old Lyme, Connecticut, a quiet, salt-arid town on the Long Island Sound where the houses are shingled, the politics are moderate, and the family money is so old it has stopped introducing itself. My family, the Hayes family, had been in Old Lyme since 1894. My great-great-grandfather, Elijah Hayes, was a railroad man who bought land the way some people buy groceries, frequently opportunistically, and with a long-term plan that wouldn't fully mature for another century. One of the properties Elijah purchased was a 47-acre parcel of rolling Connecticut farmland in the northern part of Greenwich. He did nothing with it for 30 years. In 1926, his son, my great-grandfather, William, leased that land to a newly formed social organization called the Briarcliff Athletic and Country Club under a 99-year ground lease. The terms were simple. The club would build and maintain the facilities. The Hayes family would retain ownership of the land, and at the end of the lease term, ownership of all improvements, every building, every court, every pool, every blade of landscaped grass, would revert to the Hayes family unless a renewal was negotiated. This was standard practice in 1926. Ground leases were common. Nobody thought about what would happen in 99 years because nobody planned to be alive in 99 years. But here we are, 2025, 99 years later, and I am very much alive. My father, Thomas Hayes, was a quiet man who taught American history at Connecticut College and spent his weekends sailing a 32-foot sloop he had named after his mother. He did not care about country clubs. He did not care about social status. He cared about title patterns and the Federalist Papers and making sure his 2 daughters, me and my younger sister Savannah, understood that the Hayes family's wealth was not an achievement. It was an inheritance, and inheritances are responsibilities, not decorations. My mother, Joanne, was a pediatric nurse at Lawrence Plus Memorial Hospital in New London. She worked night shifts. She came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion, and she made us breakfast at 7 a.m. anyway. She was a size 20. She wore her body without commentary. She never once in my entire life suggested that my weight was a topic that required discussion, management, or apology. I mention this because it matters. I grew up in a household where my body was simply my body, not a project, not a problem, not a performance. This is why Patricia's particular brand of aesthetic warfare hit different. I had no calluses built up, no scar tissue. When the cuts came, they went deep. I met Garrett Calloway at a property law conference in Boston when I was 25. He was 28, a commercial banker at JP Morgan, and he had the specific blend of old money manners and genuine kindness that is rarer than people think. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of easy confidence that comes from growing up in a family where nobody ever questioned whether he belonged. Our first conversation lasted 2 hours. We talked about ground leases. I know that sounds impossibly boring, but when two people who understand property law start dissecting the implications of a 99-year lease reversion, it's actually electric. He asked me to dinner. I said yes. We went to a steakhouse in the Back Bay where the waiter called everyone sir and the breadbasket was warm and endless. By the time he drove me back to my hotel, I knew two things. I was going to fall in love with this man, and his mother was going to be a problem. I was right about both. I met Patricia Ashford Calloway for the first time at a Sunday brunch at the Calloway family home in Greenwich, a 7-bedroom Georgian colonial on a 3-acre lot that Patricia maintained with the precision of a museum curator. The hedges were geometric. The gravel in the driveway was raked. The flower arrangements on the dining table were replaced every Tuesday and Friday by a florist named Claude, who Patricia referred to as our floral architect. Garrett had warned me, not dramatically. He wasn't the type, but with the careful, understated caution of a man who loves his mother and also understands exactly what she is. She's very specific about appearances, he said, adjusting his tie in the car. She'll be perfectly polite, she always is, but she'll also be evaluating. Just be yourself. I'm always myself. That's generally the problem, he laughed. But his jaw was tight. Patricia opened the front door wearing a cream silk blouse, tailored trousers, and a smile that had been professionally calibrated. She was 61, slender in the way that disciplined women of a certain generation are slender. Not naturally, but through decades of portion control, Pilates, and a near-religious commitment to avoiding carbohydrates. Her hair was a precise shade of champagne blonde. Her jewelry was understated and expensive, the kind of pieces that whisper rather than shout. She looked at me the way an appraiser looks at a property with undisclosed damage. Starting at my face, acceptable, perhaps even attractive, she seemed to conclude and then traveling downward where the assessment became less favorable. My hips, my thighs, the way my dress, a perfectly tailored wrap dress in emerald green that I had specifically chosen because it made me feel powerful, hugged the curves that Patricia's entire lifestyle was engineered to eliminate. Brooklyn, she said, extending her hand. Garrett has told us so much about you. He had not. I knew he had not because Garrett had told me he was keeping details to a minimum to avoid giving Patricia material for prejudgment. But Patricia was a woman who said what sounded correct rather than what was true, and Garrett has told us so much about you, sounded warmer than I have been dreading this introduction since my son mentioned your dress size. Brunch was an exercise in coded communication. Patricia asked me about my work. I told her about property law, about trust administration, about the Hayes family's real estate portfolio, which I mentioned casually without specifics, the way you mention a thing you do not need to brag about because it is simply a fact. She listened politely, then she asked the question, "And do you exercise, Brooklyn?" Garrett's fork paused mid-air. His father, Richard, a retired corporate attorney who communicated primarily through silence and bourbon, looked at his plate with the focused intensity of a man who has learned to make himself invisible during his wife's social operations. I swim, I said, 3 times a week. 1.5 miles each session. Oh, how nice. That's very low impact. Low impact. The word hung in the dining room like smoke. What Patricia meant, and what everyone at that table understood she meant was, if you exercise, why do you still look like that? I smiled. It is. That's why I like it. The brunch ended with air kisses and a promise to do this again soon. In the car, Garrett was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, he said finally. Don't apologize for her. I'm not apologizing for her. I'm apologizing that you had to sit through that, Garrett. I have sat through worse. She's not the first person to look at my body and see a problem. She won't be the last. She's wrong. I know she's wrong. The question is whether you know she's wrong. Not just today, but on the days when she's standing in our kitchen telling you she's wrong. He pulled the car over. Right there on the Merritt Parkway, on the narrow shoulder, with traffic humming past. He turned to me and said, with the absolute clarity of a man who had made a decision he would never unmake, I chose you. I will keep choosing you. My mother's opinions about your body are not a factor in any equation I will ever calculate. We got married 7 months later. Small ceremony. A converted barn in Litchfield County. Wildflowers. 70 guests. My mother cried the good kind of tears. Garrett's father shook my hand and said, Welcome to the circus. Patricia wore a cream suit and a smile that did not reach her eyes. The Briarcliff Country Club was Patricia's kingdom. She had joined at 32, risen through the social ranks with the methodical patience of someone climbing a corporate ladder, and been elected board president at 49. For the past 11 years, she had governed Briarcliff the way she governed everything, with absolute aesthetic authority. Briarcliff was not merely a country club, it was a performance space. The members were performers. The golf was secondary, the tennis was incidental. What mattered, what had always mattered, was the visual coherence of the community, the right clothes, the right cars, the right bodies. When Garrett suggested that we apply for membership, it's important to Mom, and the pool is genuinely nice. I agreed because I loved my husband and because I was curious, not about the club, about Patricia. I wanted to see what she would do when her world and my body occupied the same application. I filed the application in March. It was thorough: financial statements, residency verification, 2 letters of recommendation from existing members, both of whom were friends of Garrett's from childhood, and a personal statement that I wrote in approximately 12 minutes because, frankly, getting into a country club should not require the emotional labor of a college admissions essay. The application went to the membership review committee. A 5-person panel chaired by, you can already see where this is going, Patricia Ashford Calloway. I heard nothing for 6 weeks. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in May, I received a letter. Heavy cream cardstock, Briarcliff stationery, embossed. Inside, 2 paragraphs of polished, institutional regret. Dear Ms. Hayes Calloway, the Membership Review Committee has carefully considered your application and, after thorough evaluation, has determined that your candidacy does not meet the current membership criteria at this time. We encourage you to reapply in the future. We wish you the very best. No explanation, no specifics, no criteria cited. Garrett was furious, quietly furious, the Calloway way, but furious. He called Patricia that evening. Mom, Brooklyn's application was rejected. Oh, sweetheart. I know, I'm so sorry. The committee felt, and this is strictly confidential, that the fitness and presentation standards weren't quite met. You know how particular Briarcliff is about maintaining a certain image? What fitness standards? Brooklyn swims 4 miles a week. Garrett, darling, I don't make the rules. I just enforce them. She did make the rules. She had literally written the presentation standards clause into the membership guidelines during her 3rd year as board president. It was a provision so deliberately vague. Members shall maintain a standard of physical presentation consistent with the club's traditions of health and wellness, that it could be applied to anyone, but in practice it was applied to anyone Patricia didn't want. I found out the details of what actually happened inside the committee room 3 weeks later, from a board member named Helen Crawford Morrison. Helen was 64, a retired federal judge, and she had been on the Briarcliff board for 9 years. She was also the kind of woman who had spent her entire career in the judiciary, and therefore had approximately 0 tolerance for procedural abuse. Helen called me on a Saturday morning. Brooklyn, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm doing this because what happened in that committee room was wrong. I'm listening. Your application was blackballed. The vote was 3-2. Patricia cast the deciding negative vote. She argued, and I'm going to quote her as closely as I can, that the club has always maintained certain fitness and presentation standards, and Brooklyn, bless her heart, simply doesn't reflect the Briarcliff image, she also said, And this is the part that made me pick up the phone. We can't have members who make the other women uncomfortable in the pool area. It's a matter of club culture. I was standing in my kitchen. Cash was asleep on the tile floor. The coffee maker was doing its thing. And I felt something settle inside me, not anger, exactly, something quieter, something architectural. The same feeling I get when I'm reading a lease document and I find the clause that changes everything. Helen, I said, thank you for telling me. What are you going to do? I'm going to review a lease that evening. After Garrett had gone to sleep, I went into my home office. I opened the fireproof filing cabinet where I keep the Hayes family trust documents, the ones my father had entrusted to me before he passed, the ones I had spent the last 3 years organizing, cataloging, and understanding, with the meticulous attention of a woman who knows that paperwork is the most powerful weapon in existence. I pulled the Briarcliff ground lease. I had read it before. I had read it in law school, actually, as a case study in long-term land lease structures. But I had never read it the way I read it that night. Slowly, carefully, with the specific attention of a woman who has just been told that her body is incompatible with a building that sits on her own dirt. The lease was 16 pages, standard language for a 1926 ground lease. But 3 clauses were relevant. Clause 14. Upon expiration of the lease term, all improvements, structures, and fixtures constructed upon the leased premises shall become the property of the lessor. Clause 22. The lessee shall have the right to negotiate a renewal of the lease in the final year of the term, subject to the lessor's approval. Clause 29. In the event that no renewal is agreed upon, the lessee shall vacate the premises within 180 days of the lease expiration date. The lease expired on September 15, 2025. It was currently June. That gave the club 90 days to negotiate a renewal with me. Because I was the lessor. The Hayes Family Trust, of which I was the sole trustee and primary beneficiary since my father's death 3 years prior, owned the land, all 47 acres. Every blade of grass on that golf course. Every square foot beneath that $14 million clubhouse. Every inch of clay on those tennis courts that Patricia didn't think my body was fit to walk on. Mine. I sat in my office chair and I stared at the lease for a very long time. Cash wandered in and put his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears and I thought about what I wanted. Not revenge exactly. Something more precise than revenge. I wanted Patricia to understand, not in theory, not as an abstraction, but in the specific, tangible, irreversible language of property law, that the ground she stood on was not hers, had never been hers, and that the woman she had just rejected had the power to take every physical structure she had built her identity around and reclaim it with a single certified letter. I drafted the letter the next morning. It was 4 paragraphs, professional, clinical, the kind of letter I write 12 times a week in my practice, a lease expiration notice, nothing more, nothing less. Dear Board of Directors, Briarcliff Athletic and Country Club. This letter serves as formal notice that the ground lease between the Hayes Family Trust, lessor, and the Briarcliff Athletic and Country Club, lessee, dated March 14, 1926, will expire on September 15, 2025. Per Clause 22 of the lease agreement, the lessee may request a negotiation for renewal during the final year of the lease term. As the current sole trustee of the Hayes Family Trust, I am open to discussing the terms of a potential renewal. However, please be advised that any renewal will be subject to new terms, including but not limited to updated annual ground rent, revised use restrictions, and compliance with the Trust's values regarding inclusivity and non-discriminatory membership practices. Please direct all correspondence to my office. I look forward to a productive discussion. Respectfully, Brooklyn D. Hayes Calloway, Esquire, Sole Trustee, Hayes Family Trust. I sent it by certified mail on a Wednesday. I tracked the delivery. It arrived at the Briarcliff Administrative Office on Friday at 11:47 a.m. I know exactly when Patricia read it because Garrett's phone rang at 12:03 p.m. Garrett. Patricia's voice was a frequency I had never heard before, high, tight, stripped of its usual composure. Garrett, I just received a letter from your wife's family trust apparently holds the ground lease on. I know, Mom. A silence so long I could hear the grandfather clock in the Calloway hallway ticking through the phone speaker. You knew? Brooklyn is a property attorney, Mom. She's been managing the Hayes Trust for 3 years. The Briarcliff lease is one of the Trust's holdings. Why didn't you tell me? And here is the moment, the specific, precise, beautiful moment, where my husband said the sentence that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You never asked. The emergency board meeting was called for the following Tuesday. Patricia had no choice. The lease expiration was an existential threat to the club, and the board needed to understand the situation before they could begin negotiations. I was not invited to the meeting. But Helen was on the board, and Helen, God bless Helen, called me from her car in the parking lot 20 minutes after it ended. It was extraordinary, she said, and I could hear her trying not to laugh. Patricia presented the situation as a routine lease renewal matter and suggested the board authorize her to negotiate directly with the trust. With me? Yes. Except she didn't say with Brooklyn, she said with the Hayes Family Trust, as if you were an abstract entity rather than the woman she blackballed from the club 8 weeks ago. What happened? I happened. I stood up and said, for the record, the sole trustee of the Hayes Family Trust is Brooklyn Hayes Calloway, the same applicant whose membership this board rejected in May on the basis of, and I'm quoting Patricia's language, fitness and presentation standards. And then the room got very quiet. I could picture it, the leather chairs, the oil paintings of past presidents on the walls, the crystal water pitchers, and Patricia sitting at the head of the table, watching her kingdom register the fact that the woman she had excluded was the person who owned the very ground it was built on. Then Robert Whitfield, you know Robert, the retired investment banker, said something absolutely devastating. He said, so let me make sure I understand this correctly. We rejected a qualified applicant because of her body type, and she owns our land. Is anyone else seeing the liability issue here, or is it just me? Helen told me the meeting devolved into what she diplomatically described as a vigorous discussion of governance failures. 3 board members demanded Patricia's resignation. 2 others suggested that the club immediately reverse the membership decision as a goodwill gesture. Patricia, according to Helen, sat through the entire meeting without speaking. When it was over, she stood up, collected her handbag, a $12,000 Birkin, because even in crisis Patricia was on brand, and walked out of the room without a word. She called me that evening. I let it ring 4 times. Brooklyn, her voice was controlled, barely. I think we should have a conversation. I agree, but not on the phone, Patricia, in person, at my office. I'll have my associate prepare the renewal terms. Brooklyn, surely we can handle this as family. We are not handling this as family, Patricia. You made that very clear when you told a 5-person committee that I was too fat for your swimming pool. This is a legal matter between a lessor and a lessee. My assistant will send you available appointment times. Bring your attorney. I hung up. Cash looked at me from his bed in the corner of my office. I swear that dog was smiling. Patricia arrived at my office the following Thursday at 10 a.m. She brought the club's attorney, a nervous man named Douglas Fletcher, who clearly understood the catastrophic weakness of his client's position. Patricia was dressed immaculately, a powder blue Oscar de la Renta suit, her hair freshly blown out, her composure surgically reconstructed. I was wearing a charcoal blazer that fit me perfectly. My size 22 body was seated behind a mahogany desk that was larger than Patricia's dining table. On the wall behind me hung my Georgetown law degree, my bar certification, and a framed photograph of my great-great-grandfather Elijah Hayes standing on a piece of Connecticut farmland in 1898. The same farmland we were currently discussing. Thank you for coming, I said. Please, sit down. Douglas opened by stating the club's interest in a standard renewal at terms consistent with the original lease. This was, legally speaking, adorable. The original 1926 lease charged annual ground rent of $400. Adjusted for inflation, the current fair market ground rent for 47 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.8 million per year. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were the proposed renewal terms. The new lease will be for 25 years, I said, renewable at my discretion. The annual ground rent will be $2.4 million, which is below fair market value, and I'm offering that discount as a gesture of good faith. Douglas turned pale. Patricia's jaw tightened. Additionally, I continued, the lease will include a non-discrimination clause. Membership decisions at Briarcliff will be made solely on the basis of financial qualification and residency requirements. Any provision related to what was the language? Fitness and presentation standards will be removed from the membership guidelines immediately. Patricia's fingers were gripping the armrest of her chair. And finally, I said, looking directly at Patricia for the first time since she sat down, The board will issue a formal written apology to any applicant who has been denied membership under the presentation standards provision. That apology will be posted in the clubhouse lobby and published in the club's quarterly newsletter. The room was silent. Douglas was scribbling notes with the frantic energy of a man who was simultaneously calculating legal fees and career choices. Patricia spoke. "And if we don't accept these terms?" I leaned back in my chair. I folded my hands. And I said, with the absolute calm of a woman who knows exactly what she owns, "Then the lease expires on September 15th. Per Clause 29, you have 180 days to vacate. Per Clause 14, all improvements revert to the Hayes Family Trust. Every building, every pool, every tennis court, every blade of grass." I paused. "And I will convert the property into a public park. I've already spoken with the Greenwich Land Trust about a conservation easement. They're very enthusiastic." Patricia's face went through approximately 7 stages of emotion in 4 seconds. I watched each one arrive and depart. Shock, fury, disbelief, calculation, fear, humiliation, and finally, the one I had been waiting for, recognition. She recognized in that moment what I was. Not the fat daughter-in-law she had dismissed. Not the woman too heavy for her tennis courts. Not the body that didn't reflect the Briarcliff image. She saw a property attorney. She saw a trustee. She saw a woman who owned the ground beneath everything Patricia had spent 30 years building. She saw me. "We'll need to discuss this with the full board," Douglas said. "Of course you have 30 days, they signed in 11. The Briarcliff Country Club renewed its lease under my terms. The annual ground rent, $2.4 million, now funds the Hayes Family Trust's charitable arm, which provides scholarships to first-generation college students in Connecticut. The non-discrimination clause was adopted unanimously by the board. The fitness and presentation standards provision was struck from the membership guidelines permanently. Patricia resigned as board president. She did not do so voluntarily. The board vote was 5-0. Even the 2 members who had initially supported her in my blackball voted for her removal. Institutional survival, it turns out, is a more powerful motivator than social allegiance. My membership application was approved, unanimously, without reapplication. I received my membership card on a Saturday. I went to the club that afternoon. I walked through the front entrance, the main entrance, not the service entrance, not the side door, in a swimsuit and a cover-up and flip-flops. I walked past the reception desk, past the dining room, past the trophy cases and the oil portraits of past presidents, including a painting of Patricia that had been quietly moved from the main hall to a storage closet. I walked out to the pool. It was a gorgeous Connecticut afternoon, 82 degrees, cloudless, the kind of summer day that feels like it was designed specifically for swimming. The pool was Olympic-sized, surrounded by white lounge chairs, shaded by a row of impeccably maintained elm trees. I took off my cover-up. I stood at the edge of the pool, size 22, curves and all, taking up exactly as much space as I take up, which is exactly the right amount. 3 women on nearby lounge chairs looked at me. One of them, a woman in her 40s wearing oversized sunglasses and a one-piece that cost more than my first car, lowered her sunglasses and stared. I recognized the look. It was the same look Patricia had given me at that first brunch. The appraisal, the measurement. I smiled at her. Then I dove in. The water was perfect, clean and cold and blue. I swam 1.5 miles, same as I always do. Lap after lap, my arms cutting through the water that sat above land my family has owned for 131 years. When I was done, I climbed out, wrapped myself in a towel, and sat on a lounge chair. Cash could not join me at the club. They have a no-dogs policy. I am currently reviewing that policy. Garrett came to the pool an hour later. He sat down next to me and handed me a glass of iced tea. "How's the water?" he asked. "It's on my land. It's perfect," he laughed. We sat there together, watching the sun move across the Connecticut sky, listening to the sound of water and wind and the quiet hum of a world that was slowly, reluctantly making room. Patricia has not spoken to me since the negotiation. Garrett tells me she has joined a different club, a smaller one in Westport, where she does not sit on the board and where nobody knows that her previous kingdom was built on borrowed ground. I do not wish Patricia harm. I do not celebrate her resignation. I am not the kind of woman who takes pleasure in another person's humiliation, even when that person spent years trying to humiliate me. But I am the kind of woman who knows what she owns, who reads the fine print, who understands that the most powerful thing in any room is not the person with the loudest voice or the thinnest body. It's the person with the deed. I have the deed. I have always had the deed. And the ground holds. If this story hit you, if you've ever been blackballed, excluded, looked at like you didn't belong, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one, subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next story. Know what you own. All of it, especially the ground you stand on.